my friends. Mary Rose here. It's Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific. We gather, as we do weekly, to talk about story structure, writing craft, and the mindset of the working writer, the writer who's thriving, the writer who's making progress, the writer who's having fun. I hope you're all having fun. I'm always grateful to see some of you here live. I welcome you. It's great to have a bunch of you here. But if you're watching on the replay, that's cool too. Our schedules don't necessarily line up. In fact, one of the joys of welcoming a new group of students into the Path of the Storyteller program, which is my own program where I teach and mentor writers, is meeting writers from so many different time zones. We always manage to figure out a way to gather and get our work done. But it's one of the benefits of being able to use the online tools that we have nowadays to connect and share some mentor energy with you guys through this little screen. So in case you've not been here before, I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author best known for my middle grade fiction. You can see behind me some examples of this. Actually, I'll move my head a little bit. That little rainbow stack are the foreign editions of the Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place series, which is a middle grade series. And above my head, next to the silver pot, is Alice's Farm, A Rabbit's Tale, which just came out in paperback, by the way. I'm so excited about that. Who doesn't love a portable paperback? I know I do. Always bring a book. This is good advice for everyone, but it's particularly good advice for writers. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I've just given you some information, right? Who am I? What have I written? Why might you think that I know a thing or two about writing fiction? It's information. It's important to know. It's how we get the conversation started. It's how we get to know each other. It's how we make progress, right? In moving this conversation forward, our relationship forward. I provide information. It's how I mentor you. If you think about it, we're not just flapping our gums when we talk, right? There's a lot of information, exchange of information involved. Well, guess what? In our writing, in our storytelling, one of the jobs that we have to do on every page, and do it well and gracefully so that it doesn't draw too much attention to itself, is add information to the story. Now, there are some words that writers bandy about, like backstory and exposition, that make it seem like adding information is like a special task, a particular moment, like, oh, and here comes the backstory, or wait, let's take a break for the exposition. But I actually kind of want to soften the way you think about those words, because the adding of information is constant. It is constant. I'm going to say it again. We are always adding information in good storytelling. And it's not something that is, in the footnotes or in the prologue or, in the author's note at the end. The information is, in fact, the fuel that keeps the story moving forward. So today I want to talk about how we add information to a story, how we do it in a way that it feels like the reader always knows what's going on, but is never bored or overwhelmed by a clumsy or excessive dump of data. I think we all know what I'm talking about here. It can be hard to know when to let the reader in on certain facts of the story. How much does the reader need to know, right? We don't want them to not know enough, but we don't want them to be overwhelmed by excessive info. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I actually have, just so you know, in case you want to, I'm scratching because I'm pretty sure I have a piece of my kitty cat's fur on my nose and it's tickling me. See, that's information. It's very specific. If you're watching these videos, you've met my cats. Probably one of them will come jump on my lap while we're talking. Maybe that's a great way to introduce this concept that I want to use as our label for this discussion today. The archetypal energy that delivers information into a story. We have a name for it. We call it the Herald archetype. The word herald, of course, refers to the traditional role of the herald, that figure who comes in and goes, I have news from the king. You know, they're delivering information. That's what a herald is. And so our talk today is about the delivery of information, but what it really is about is the skillful use of the herald archetype. And so if my cat jumps in my lap during this live stream, we can welcome it as a herald archetype. Perhaps the cat has got some news for us. Okay. Now, I want to define that herald archetype a little bit, but I'm very quickly going to get into some specifics. I want to be super practical today because this is a practical problem. Am I right? I'm going to open up the comments here. You guys let me know what stumbling blocks you may sometimes run into when it comes to adding information to your stories. If you have questions about how to do it, if you've encountered difficulties in doing it, post them in the comments. We'll make sure we're going to get to everybody's questions today before we wrap up. All right. So practically today, I've got, I think, a half a dozen. Yes, I have 6 very specific techniques for adding information to the story, and each has its do's and don'ts, like the right way to do it and the things that you might fall into that are less effective. Okay, so this is a good one if you like to take notes. Maybe you have a little pencil handy today. All right, or come back and watch the replay. So before we get into my half dozen specific techniques for adding information, I just want to keep this idea of the herald archetype front and center. I want to make sure you've got some clarity about it. The story cannot move forward without the constant influx of information, right? It's one of the things that I say to my Path of the Storyteller students, that we can ask ourselves to add new information in every line. Now, that is obviously a very high standard of compression. But as I go through these, I want you to just notice how, if you're using them all fluently, that you can actually think in terms of adding new information in every line. Another way of looking at it is that good writing is keeping a forward-moving line of thought moving in the reader's mind as the reader goes through, right? As they have the experience of reading top to bottom, left to right, turn the page, do it again, that you are kind of creating the train of thought that's in their heads. If they're engaged with what you've written, that's what's going on in their heads. Now, you know what the inside of your head is like, right? It moves fast. It jumps around. It is sometimes hard to pay attention. Sometimes it's hard to focus. It's the nature of the brain to be easily distracted. It's sort of built into being human. We are aware. We have senses that are delivering information all the time. Things are trying to get our attention. We are, on a very primitive level, alert to danger. If someone calls our name, we're primed to hear it, right? And so if you think about that, you start to appreciate that in order to keep the reader engaged continuously, you have to keep giving them something new that engages them. If you repeat yourself, or if you rehash things that they already know, or if the story is just kind of, treading water, as it were, and no new information is coming, it goes slack in the reader's brain. And all of a sudden, all of that stuff that's kind of already on the periphery, that is very eager to distract them from your incredible book, is going to take prominence, and they will be distracted. So let's bear that in mind, right? When I say add new information in every line, there's it's a more nuanced instruction than it at first appears. All right, are you ready for my first technique? I bet you are. This is so obvious as to almost be like, why do we even have to remember to do this? But I have a feeling that some of you are going to be a little bit glad to be reminded, okay, when we need to add new information to the story, it can be narrated. It can simply be narrated information. Let me give you an example. In The Hobbit, there's, I think we get to page 2. We start with, in the hole in the ground, there was a hobbit. Then there's a little description, quite detailed, of the Hobbit's hobbit hole with all these wonderful details in it, which reveal a tremendous amount about the character and personality of the inhabitant of this hobbit hole. And then we learn his name. And then we're still on the page 2, and the narrator of this tale, which is written in the third person, says, "Oh, hobbits, I suppose I ought to tell you a little bit about hobbits." And then proceeds to give us a few sentences, just a few sentences, where we learn what kind of creatures are, how big they are, their furry toes, you know, the few, just what we need to get on with, which is the key instruction here, right? Which is that we're told what we need to get on with. We don't need to be told everything, just what we need to get on with. That's narrated information. You know, there's nothing wrong with simply doing that. That happens to be an intrusive third-person narrator, a narrator who says, "Oh, I suppose people don't know much about hobbits these days. I suppose I ought to tell you something," right? It has a kind of a storyteller vibe about it. That happens to be the voice of that book. But even if you don't have a storyteller vibe, even if you don't use an intrusive third person, you can still just give the reader information, as long as you don't go overboard. I'll give you another example from one of my other frequently referenced mentor texts because it's so magnificent. Charlotte's Web. When we first meet Fern, the story kicks into high gear. And when she's in the kitchen having breakfast with her mother, and her father walks through the kitchen with an axe. I'm just going to get the page up here. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. So that's where they are. They're in the kitchen. That's what they're doing. 2 pieces of information. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." New information. I'm going to talk about dialogue as my next point. But right now we're talking about narration. "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said his mother. And the scene continued. So that "who was only 8" is information that is very important to the story. We need to know how old Fern is, because Fern's growth, Fern's development, her movement from being a child to being a kind of a pre-adolescent is very much part of the structure of the book, of the storytelling of the book. And "who was only 8" is a fact. It's there. It's just narrated. It's not narrated in an intrusive way. That's not the kind of narrator this book has. It's not, "Oh, I suppose you're wondering how old Fern is. Well, let me tell you enough to get on with. She was only 8. You know, it doesn't do that. It simply gives us the information. So that is an example of narrated information. Those were both examples from a third-person narrator. And some of you are right now thinking, "Well, yeah, but what about the first person? The first person can't just do that." It's like, well, actually, yes. A first-person narrator can do that. In fact, first-person narrators do that all the time. I'm going to, I have a little example here from Bud Not Buddy, but I think I lost the page. Hang on a second. At a point, oh yeah, I had to lose the page. So Bud Not Buddy is one of my favorite middle grade books. It's so great in so many ways, but it's written in a first person narrator. And one of the, I found what I was looking for. One of the qualities that this book does so brilliantly is that it uses the voice of a first person narrator who does not understand a lot of what is going on in the book. A lot of the events of the book are designed in such a way that they have resonance and meaning that is more mature than Bud even is aware of. But because the first person narration is done so brilliantly, the reader gets the benefit of both. The reader gets the poignancy of Bud's innocence in the middle of a lot of things that he doesn't fully grasp the connotation of, but also gets the real story, gets the bigger picture as well. So when we meet Bud at the beginning of Bud Not Buddy, he is going to be sent to a new foster home. And this is from page 3. Here we go again. I felt like I was walking in my sleep as I followed Jerry back to the room where all the boys' beds were jammed together. Oh, that's an interesting piece of information about what this place is like. This was the 3rd foster home I was going to, and I'm used to packing up and leaving, he continues. Do you see the information woven in quite effortlessly? This was the 3rd foster home I'm going to, Bud says. Now, he's just narrating the book in a first-person voice. He's not speaking to a particular listener. This is the conceit of first-person narration, is that we can just sort of be in somebody's head as they self-narrate their experience. But a first-person narrator can do just the same thing. This was the 3rd foster home I was going to. It's important for us to know that, isn't it? It's a useful piece of backstory about our hero, Bud. So I hope that this is clear. I'm going to peek in the comments just to see if anyone's got any questions. But narrated information is like the basic technique of adding Herald energy into your storytelling. You can just come out and tell us. Now, here's the do and the don't. Do remember Tolkien's advice, just enough to get on with. Keep it absolutely succinct. This works best in these throwaway phrases. Fern was always 8. This was the 3rd foster home I'm going to. Oh, I suppose you need to know a little bit about Hobbit. Sentence 1, sentence 2, that's it. We move on. This is not the place to do a 3-page digression, right, that goes into a whole life story. You can weave these tidbits in very naturally in the narration. So the do is to keep it short, and the don't is to don't include things that are not relevant to that moment of the story. So, okay, that's our first one. Super practical technique. The second one. Well, we already had a little example when Fern heard her mother say, well, some pigs were born in the barn last night and one of them was a runt. That's dialogue. Now, dialogue can be one of the best ways to add new information to a story. And here's why. Readers love dialogue. I think I've talked about dialogue in other live streams. It's a fascinating topic. Most of us as readers know how much we like dialogue. Some writers are afraid to write it. You shouldn't be. It is your secret weapon for reader engagement. And because of that, dialogue can be one of your superpowers, really a secret weapon in terms of adding information to a story. Because if you put information in dialogue, it's like shining a spotlight on it. Your reader is going to see it. We listen to dialogue in real life. If people are talking, we listen, right? If people speak to us, we listen. It has a different quality than the sound of the lawnmower outside, or we don't tune it out necessarily. It's dialogue. People are talking. We want to know what's going on. We're curious creatures that way. So how might we use dialogue in a very practical way to add information to a story? Well, your hero is at the center of the action, we hope, should be. And so secondary characters can simply tell your hero stuff your hero doesn't yet know. For example, there were some pigs born in the barn last night. That's news. Is it big news? It's huge news. It's the news that kicks off the whole book, right? It's not narrated. It's embedded in dialogue. It's super important, and therefore it has a spotlight on it. Okay, so conversations can be rich with information, but there are some do's and don'ts. So here's the pitfall of dialogue being used to incorporate Herald energy into the story. The biggest pitfall is when you use dialogue and you know that you're trying to get a lot of information on the page, and you just have the characters talk about the stuff that you want the reader to know for no good reason. Another character might approach your hero and tell them stuff that they already know. There's no reason for this conversation to be happening. And therefore, it starts to feel very obvious. It's like, oh, they're just going to stand there and recap information that they both already know aloud so the writer can get it on the page where the reader can see it. Busted. This is a kind of a trick that you might see like in a long-running soap opera, right? Where there's so much backstory. Like maybe there's 20 years of backstory, right? About this family and that family are enemies. And the viewer needs to be caught up on a regular basis because new people are tuning in all the time. And so you have characters and these poor actors trying to make this interesting, right? Saying things like, well, as you know, as you know, we've never gotten along with him. Oh, yes, I know. You know, and there'll be these like lifeless scenes that are not about anything. They're just like the footnotes, but they're being treated as if they're important. So don't do that. That's a don't. Don't misuse dialogue, which should be the most exciting part of the page for the reader to, you know, as a cheat to just get facts on the page. If the facts are not essential at the moment, you know, just wait until they're essential. Maybe it's not the time. All right. You can have another character give news to the hero that they don't already have. That is an excellent use of dialogue as herald energy. And so we're not going to misuse this dialogue to just fill in backstory randomly. But what we are going to do to make it effective is to add new information to the story. And here's the tip, pro tip about using dialogue, okay? Don't forget to include the storytelling impact of what is discovered. So what do I mean by that? Even in a dialogue scene, it is likely that your main character is the viewpoint character. And if a piece of news is delivered through dialogue, make sure that the reader is let in on the main character's reaction to what they have just been told, because it's what that information means to your hero that is the storytelling. Is this good news or bad? Does it shock them? Does it confuse them? Are they going to feel that they now need to do something in response to learning this news, right? Let the news that is delivered in dialogue be like a domino of storytelling that tips forward and causes the next thing to happen. Whether that next thing is a big emotional response, a revelation of some kind, a rush of understanding, aha, now I know their true motives, whatever it might do to the story, let us in on it. Now, it is a common pitfall in writing dialogue scenes that writers sometimes back up too much and they start to show dialogue scenes as if we're watching a scene from a play. So this character speaks, this character replies, it goes back and forth, instead of staying inhabited in the viewpoint character, keeping them in the center of the action, and then having the secondary character, like you can see I'm using my hands now to sort of gesture like almost slightly off screen, as it were, that character is in the scene and what they're doing and saying is visible to the viewpoint character, but the impact of what they say is internal, right? It may be expressed externally. Your viewpoint character may have a strong reaction within the scene. They may say something like, I can't believe that, or you know, they may burst into tears at tragic news, or they may laugh, but you know, all of the kinds of emotional responses that they may have to this news may be expressed in the scene also. But the storytelling impact is fundamentally internal because it's what it means to their journey of change. Is what does this news indicate now? What must happen next? This is now a new beat of storytelling. All right. So use dialogue to incorporate news. And you can do it in ways large and small. You can have a whole scene where a lot of information is relayed. Back to the Hobbit as an example. The scene in the first act in which this band of dwarves comes to Bilbo's house and lays out a ton of information about the backstory, about who they are, what their relationship is to this treasure that is now being kept in this far off place called the Lonely Mountain and guarded by a dragon. All of that history, how they feel that it belongs to them, right? How the dragon got hold of it, why they want Bilbo to know about this and come along with them to help steal it back. It's relayed in dialogue, right? And so it's a lot of pages of this stuff. And what keeps it from feeling like a dump of information is that we never leave Bilbo for very long. Bilbo is having an experience being told all of this information. He is at some points fascinated by it, at some points repelled by it. There's a lot of physical behavior accompanying it because the whole time it's being expressed verbally. There's food being served, the houses being messed up. Bilbo is continually grappling with what's happening, both on the outside and on the inside. And one of the storytelling purposes of all of this information is to persuade Bilbo to come join them. And they do it by trying to persuade him, and they do it with reverse psychology, right? They do it also by saying, he's not, Gandalf's nuts. There's nothing to this guy. He's not the right guy, which immediately gets Bilbo saying, well, wait a minute, maybe I could be useful. They work on him. It's great storytelling because what happens to Bilbo during the scene is that he changes. It transforms him. It brings him from where he was to where he must be in order to actually begin the adventure. So it's a great example of using a lot of dialogue to lay a ton of information into the story to move the story forward. And that is what the point is. The story can't move forward unless we all understand that Bilbo has to break out of his old personality just enough to say, okay, I'll go. He's got a lot of transformation ahead, right? But he has to change enough to be willing to start the adventure. Tolkien uses dialogue to add information and uses information to move the main character into a state of change. So that's the do. That's what to do. All right. Use it to further the storytelling. If you put it in dialogue, it's a lot more entertaining to the reader, and it just gives you a lot of spotlight. It puts a lot of focus on it. So you want to keep the point of view active. That's the tip. Keep the hero's point of view active during dialogue so that we get to track how this information is affecting them. I'll give you another much shorter example of dialogue being used to impart information to a reader, to a hero, and also thereby to the reader. Wilbur from Charlotte's Web, who we just met, has a conversation. In fact, it's funny because the name of the chapter in Charlotte's Web is Bad News. Bad News is the name of the chapter. It's chapter 7. And he has a conversation with his sheep, one of the old sheep. And the sheep says, hello, seems to me you're putting on weight. Well, yes, I guess I am, replied Wilbur. At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining. He's still very young. Just the same, I don't envy you, said the old sheep. You know why they're fattening you up, don't you? No, said Wilbur. Well, I don't like to spread bad news, said the sheep. But they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you. That's why. They're going to what? Screamed Wilbur. All right, there's a great example of adding information and telling the story through dialogue. Wilbur does not know until this moment that his fate on this farm is that he's going to be slaughtered for food. He needs that information in order for the story to continue. It is a huge shock. He has a huge reaction. And we bear witness as readers to the moment that this information is presented in the story by seeing it as a dialogue scene. All right. So that's just a great example. That information is so significant that it would be I think, be a lesser choice to weave it in with the subtlety of Fern, who was always 8. You know, we don't weave in like, oh, Wilbur, who was destined to be slaughtered for bacon. It's not woven in the narration because it is such an important piece of information. It's a piece of information that shoves the storytelling forward, and therefore E.B. White puts it in dialogue. So those are some examples. I would love for you guys to explore different ways to use a dialogue to put a spotlight on the really important pieces of information that you've got introduced into your story. Okay, that's 2. The first one was just using narration. Second one was putting information in dialogue. Okay, you guys are keeping up, right? Wonderful. The third one is a really fun one, and it definitely has a pitfall, which I'll point out. The third one is memory. Now, when I say memory, I mean that the main character remembers a piece of information, and that in the act of them remembering it, it is made visible to the reader, right? So if the main character knows something, then remembering it is something that they're capable of doing. They don't need to be told it. They already know it. I just want to make that clear. But part of our job as writers is to put the necessary information out where the reader can see it. And I'm going to share an example. It's one of my favorite passages. It's just a line. I'm not even going to read it. I can paraphrase it from memory. From the Kipling story, Rikki Tikki Tavi. Ricky, when we meet him at the beginning of the story, is very young. He's basically a baby mongoose. He's been washed out of his burrow by a flood, and he knows a couple of things about being a mongoose, but he's a baby. He's untested. He's untried. He's never done much before. He was living at home with his parents in the burrow, but now he's on his own, and he's got to figure out how to do the things that a grown-up mongoose needs to do. And one of those things is to fight cobras. And that's part of the rules of the world. And when Ricky first has an encounter with a cobra, it's a huge moment, right? One would imagine it would be a very huge moment. But Kipling wants us to know exactly how big of a moment it is. And so he doesn't just let us assume that, oh, wow, Ricky's little and there's a big cobra. This is a scary moment. In the narration, he includes a moment of memory for Ricky. And he tells us that although Ricky had never seen a live cobra before, big piece of information, his mother had fed him on the meat of cobras as a baby. And he knew that this was his job in life as a mongoose, was to kill cobras. Now, think about this. Not only is Ricky an untested kind of baby mongoose, but the key information that he has never even seen a cobra before until he encounters this massive cobra in this garden that he's ended up in is so important that it needs to be stated outright. Kipling wants the reader to know what a big moment this is, right? It's his first in his life, his first glimpse of a live cobra. And so he has Ricky remember. But my mother prepared me for this moment by feeding me the meat of dead cobras. So I've been trained for this. I've never had this encounter before, but I've been prepared. Now, Ricky doesn't need to know to be told that this is the first time he's seeing a cobra, but the reader needs to be clear about it because it's good storytelling. It raises the stakes. So this moment of memory does double duty because it's herald energy for the reader's benefit. The reader now understands something about the stakes of this encounter, just how deeply unprepared Ricky is, and yet how it's also his destiny. So much information packed into this sentence of Ricky remembering, plus there is a dose of mentor energy that is really powerful because Ricky is scared, but then he remembers that his mother fed him dead cobras and that this is his destiny, and he finds within him the courage to proceed with the scene, the confrontation with the cobra. When we layer archetypal energy in our storytelling, it pops off the page. It is literally turning up the juice of story energy. So the layering of the Herald energy with the mentor energy in this sentence is why it literally jumps off the page. It's so memorable. So you too can use a memory very strategically and judiciously to let the reader in on things that the reader needs to know. But here's what I don't want you to do. And alas, my dear storytellers, I do see this quite a lot, and I understand why. So let me take a moment to explain this. Don't have your hero suddenly remember something that they had somehow forgotten up until this point. I see this all the time as an attempt, well-intended, but not a great technique, a well-intended attempt to add information to the scene that needs to come into the scene. And the writer doesn't have a full menu of techniques of how to get that information into the scene. And so they settle for just kind of shoving it into the hero's head without it really being plausible, because things that are important we don't forget. A hero who's in a moment of high stakes, in a story, has not forgotten their mission. They don't forget what's going on and then suddenly remember, and then that's new information that moves the scene forward. That's a kind of a red flag that you have not figured out active ways for your hero to move forward against external archetypal energies. That's a great time when you've got to find a herald energy of some kind to add the information that you need, to add the stimulus, that new dose of juice of energy that you need to keep this scene moving forward. So an example of a really good use of memory and a tip of what not to do. All right. Now we're going to move on to my fourth category of techniques for adding herald energy. And this is the classic herald. How many newspapers are called the Herald? The Herald Tribune, the Daily Herald, the Weekly Herald. Herald, it means news. It means delivering news. So all of the ways that you can deliver news in this very, kind of on the nose way work very well as sources of herald energy in the story. I mean, your hero receives a letter. Your hero is texted. The phone rings. Somebody is on the other end with a big piece of news. They walk by the newsstand and they see the headlines, or they pick up a newspaper and there it is in the news, right? The signs of various kinds. The world is filled with information as we walk around. Ponder for a moment where you get your stream of information from every day, and you're going to see it's everywhere. So this type of herald energy, you have to be careful that it doesn't feel too contrived. Your hero can't always be accidentally stumbling across a headline that tells them exactly what they need to know, right? That just starts to feel very coincidental and contrived. But I bet you can think of many examples where things like this happen in stories and it actually feels good. It feels just right. It feels like the story is conspiring to move forward in a way that is plausible enough. Harry Potter receives a letter inviting him to Hogwarts, right? It's got a lot of information in that letter. He's not heard of Hogwarts until this day, right? It's another great layering of archetypal energy, because it's both an invitation to an adventure, but it's also a herald bearing really shocking news, like, hello, you're a wizard. Come on, you have to be trained. This is your destiny too, right? So you can see that there's all kinds of ways to play with that. again, in Harry Potter, there's a publication, right, that they've got some kind of, I forget the name of it now, but there's some kind of wizarding magazine, and often there are stories in there that serve as heralds to add new information into the story. One of a great example of a fun herald is in The Wizard of Oz, when the Wicked Witch writes with her broomstick across the sky, "Surrender, Dorothy." That's a message that is delivered, unmistakably delivered in skywriting by a broomstick. So you can make choices like that, and you can be creative and have fun with them, just the way the Wicked Witch and the broomstick is like a really fun way to add information to that moment. Like, Dorothy, you are really in danger now. It really raises the stakes. So have fun using all of those, but the danger is not to over-rely upon a stream of coincidences, right? You want to keep them storytelling grounded. You want to keep these things in a way, the earned rewards of a hero who's on a very active journey is going to be just as we are in life. When we take action, serendipity starts to become the wind at our backs, right? When we take action in pursuit of our goals, all of a sudden, the right people step up to help us, and we start to get lucky. We're in the right place at the right time. That's something that I think we experience in life. Your hero has access to that too. So we call that the reward archetype, right? The heroes earn rewards by being committed to their journey and proceeding bravely. And you will find that pieces of information can be very good rewards, and they can come in all these different ways. Now, I am now up to my fifth one, and I have to say that this fifth category of herald energy techniques is a favorite of mine. You can't overuse it, but you're going to find it in literature a lot. And it's what inspired this to be the topic this week, because I was rereading Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I was rereading this for a purpose, not that you need a purpose to ever reread a classic and see what you can learn from it. But I was doing some research about pirates because I create content for my kid readers every month at the Swanburn Academy membership. And our content right now is pirates. And I thought, I really have to reread Treasure Island. I haven't read it in a long time. And there's a great scene in Treasure Island, which I think you've all had enough decades to read Treasure Island that I'm not going to worry about being spoilery. But this is a tale of a boy who ends up on a voyage because a treasure map has been found, and there's allegedly this pirate treasure buried on this island, and they're going to go get it. And they recruit this crew to take them there. And the ship's cook, is a guy named Long John Silver. He's the classic archetype of the pirate. He's got a parrot on his shoulder, peg leg, whole thing. He's the ship's cook. Our hero is a boy named Jim Hawkins, and he thinks he's his friend. Like he's just a great guy that everybody loves. During this scene in Treasure Island, while they're on the voyage, Jim gets hungry, and he goes out on deck, and he wants to get an apple from the apple barrel. Stay with me now. There are no apples. The barrel's almost empty, and Jim's just a boy. So in order to get to the apples that are at the bottom of the barrel, he has to kind of climb into the barrel. And so he climbs in, and he's going to get himself an apple and climb out again. But while he's in the barrel, of course, he's hidden. And at that moment, Long John Silver, who we think until this point is a good guy, comes out on deck. So now it's nighttime. It's secretive. And there are some other members of the crew there. And they discuss the planned mutiny. They are going to, when they get to this island, they're going to mutiny against the folks who are in charge, who kind of charted this voyage in the first place, and they're going to take this treasure for themselves. Can you imagine Jim's shock and dismay? All right, my friends, this is what we call an eavesdropping scene. Eavesdropping is a really fun way to add new information into the story if you use it well. And if you think about it, you are going to realize that there are so many eavesdropping scenes in literature. Why? Because it's an incredibly fun scene. It's suspenseful. Jim's in the bottom of the apple barrel. They don't know he's there. They're speaking freely. And so we understand that Jim is now, if he gets caught, his life is in danger. So the stakes are very high. We have two things going on, and this is what I want you to focus on, right? There are two things going on right now, which is that there's an incredible deployment of Herald energy, because the conversation that our hero is eavesdropping on is packed with new information. It's new to the reader and it's new to the hero, and it changes everything. The crew that he thought was loyal are actually ready to mutiny. The guy that he was kind of thinking of almost as a father figure is the head of the, the head of the mutiny. He's the leader of the criminality. Everything changes right now. Look, that's a layering of archetypal energy as well, because we've got our Herald energy coming in, new information. We've got shapeshifter energy, because Long John Silver has been pretending to be something that he wasn't. And right now the truth is being revealed. And in the meantime, our hero is in a life-threatening predicament. Think about how this changes the reader's experience of having to absorb a lot of new information at once. This does not feel like a dump of backstory, right? This feels like the most dramatic scene you've ever read. It's thrilling. If he makes a noise and they find him, he's dead, right? So it's really, really exciting. And that is the value of designing a scene where you use the Herald archetype energy, not just to put the information where the reader can see it, but to move the story forward. So this, excuse the pun, because it was an apple barrel, but this is an extremely fruitful example of how not only to use eavesdropping in a plot, and, if it was good enough for Shakespeare and Hamlet, it's good enough for you. You don't have to be shy about using eavesdropping. But think about how well it's done. Think about how it moves the story forward, and how it is, in fact, a lot of things at once. It's a high-stakes test of survival for our hero. So we are not simply listening. The conceit of eavesdropping is not done in a passive way. It's so active with storytelling that it becomes an absolutely gripping scene, even though what our hero is doing basically is hiding. That's what he's doing. He's hiding during this. All right. So I want you to think about that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, Treasure Island, I should say. Classic work. All right. And here's my last one. And this is important. And again, it's one of those storytelling techniques that it's useful for a lot of reasons, but it's especially useful in adding Herald energy, in adding information. And this is something that I call inflected detail. Now, what do I mean by inflected detail? Well, details are a kind of information, right? If we are describing something and we offer some details about how it looks, how it works, how big it is, the color of it, we're setting the scene, we're trying to keep the fictional dream alive in our readers' minds. Those are all details, and the more specific and concrete we can be, the better, right? It's we have a little saying, a path of the storyteller, which is you always name the dog. It's never just a dog. There are no dogs in fiction. It is an elderly poodle wearing a bandana, right? It's something that is inflected with some specificity. But here's the other thing that your details can be inflected with. They can be inflected with character, and they can be inflected with story. So if the poodle wanders on and it has a bandana, that's a bandana. But if the bandana is like a picture of a punk rock band from the 80s, if it's a souvenir bandana from a concert, right? Then that tells me something about that poodle's owner. It's inflected with character. Right away, I know something I didn't know before. And you see that it's information. The inflection of the detail adds information to the story without any effort. It doesn't require narration. It doesn't require the narration to tell us whose owner used to be in a punk band in the Lower East Side, right? It doesn't require the narration to spell it out for us. It doesn't require you to invent a dialogue scene. It doesn't, doesn't require your character to fall into a barrel and eavesdrop or hide behind a curtain like in Hamlet, right? It doesn't require those things. It simply is inflected with meaning, and the meaning creates a sense in the reader of like, oh, now I know something I didn't know before. I know something about this owner. Another favorite example of an inflected detail, you may have heard me mention it before, is that description from the opening page of The Hobbit, where the nature of the details of Bilbo's home are laid out in a single paragraph. By the time we get to the end of this paragraph, we know so much about Bilbo. And my favorite one is that it's, he's got a round door like a porthole, and it has a shiny brass knob in the exact middle. The middle is not enough to describe Bilbo's personality. The exact middle is inflected with Bilbo's personality. And I hope you can feel the difference. Choosing details and inflecting them with such specificity that they start to communicate information about character is a powerful technique. And when I say inflected with character and storytelling, it's just a reminder that your character is not going to be the same at every single moment of the story. The Bilbo Baggins, who is so concerned with his kind of conservatism and his materialism and his love of things and, having nice things and being well thought of and being respectable, that's a Bilbo that needs a doorknob in the exact middle. But Bilbo later on is going to have a different set of details, right? And so later on in the story, his details will have a different inflection. I hope that makes sense. So the detail will be inflected by the character, but at the character at a particular moment of the story, right? Because the character is what? Changing. It's a transformation of consciousness. So when are we in the story will help you know what kind of inflection your details need to reveal about your character at that moment in time. All right, my friends, that is, believe it or not, a half a dozen techniques for weaving information into your storytelling. I'm going to do a quick recap. First, just narrate it, and that works in third person or first person as long as you keep it very quick and woven into what's going on. Just give us what we need to know and get on with it. Second, dialogue, incredibly useful tool for weaving information into your storytelling. The third technique was the judicious use of memory to give information a spotlight that lets the reader see it. Number 4 was kind of a roundup of these classic Herald mechanisms like letters, texts, the arrival of a herald with a trumpet who tells us, that the French are ready to attack. Shakespeare used actual heralds as herald archetypes. Why shouldn't he? Phone calls, voicemails, things that are read, newspaper headlines, and signs of various kinds. And of course, you can be creative about how to deploy all of those things. The 5th one was information overheard while eavesdropping. Many thanks to Treasure Island for that inspo. And just in case, you're wondering, like a different example, I use an eavesdropping scene to kick off the action in Alice's Farmer Rabbit's Tale. And it's fun to play with because the rabbits overhear something. They are hiding underneath this step. And when a new character enters, it frightens them and they hide. And then the point of view changes and we see what's going on in the scene. And then when we return to the rabbits, we hear what they think they heard. And so the eavesdropping is made a little bit more complicated by the fact that the rabbits are overhearing the conversation of human beings and they don't understand everything we heard. But because we go into their point of view, we get to experience how they interpret what they heard and, importantly, what they intend to do about it. So there you have that inflection of storytelling in there. Let it not be said that I tell you guys to do things that I wouldn't do myself. I use these techniques all the time in my writing. That's how I know that they're useful. And then the last one, of course, was inflected detail. Be specific, be concrete, but also think about character and story. You will be amazed at how much information you can spoon in to your writing by paying attention to the details. All right, I hope that's of use to you guys. I would love to hear more about how your writing is going and whether some of these techniques find their way into your drafting or your revising. So please always be friendly enough to leave a comment and let me know what you think. And if this was of benefit, I hope if you're not subscribed to the channel that you will subscribe, and you can hit the little thumbs up too. Let me know that we made a little progress today. I welcome you to come back every Wednesday. I go live and I love to talk about stuff that you can actually put to good use in your writing. So if you've got a question that you want me to talk about in a future Wednesday, leave me a comment. I read them all. And some of my I think most watched live streams have been the results of suggestions from the viewers, and I really appreciate that. And think it's a great dialogue. And I also love how we've got some regulars who come. Feels like a community is forming. So I'm getting some words of thanks in the comments. I appreciate that very much. I'm glad it was useful. Okay, so have a wonderful week of writing. And if you want a heads up, on Tuesdays, I email everyone on my mailing list a little bit of an announcement letting you know what the topic is and what this can whet your appetite, which is wonderful, but it also gives you a chance to email me before I go live with anything that you really want me to cover. And I read every email I get. And I do my best to incorporate your questions and requests into these discussions. So get on the email list if you're not already. It's www.pathofthestoryteller.com. All right. Happy writing, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next week.